I'll do a quick introduction of myself while people kind of straggle in from lunch, although I'm fine if this is it, because I get nervous up here. My name's Hamish Boland-Rudder. I am the online editor for the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. I have rather ambitiously live scheduled some tweets, so I'm live tweeting my own talk right now. You can follow me on Twitter if you want. You can laugh if it goes horribly wrong. In fact, this is going to be a very different talk. I'm scared to see that Emil's here in the room. I'm worried about disappointing him. There's not going to be that many diagrams of graphs. I am not a data geek. I am a journalist, a pretty dumb one. I'm what you'd call the end user, the lowest common denominator, that guy that you have to cater for when he's trying to break everything. This is a good thing for you guys. You might get a different perspective from some of the other talks today. You'll also have a few opportunities to hopefully laugh. I'm an online editor, so there's going to be a lot of stupid pop culture references. I also have a rather funny Australian accent, so you'll catch me out saying data a lot more than data. And I also don't know much about databases, as I said before, so you can all come and correct me afterwards about the stupid things that I've said, and you're free to laugh openly if there's anything particularly egregious. Let's get started. ICIJ. For obvious reasons, we tend to go with the acronym more often than our full name. We're a network of more than 190 journalists based in about 65 countries, and our focus is in-depth investigative reporting. As our slogan says, our aim is to bring together journalists from all the different countries. We aim to be the best cross-border investigative team, and we do this through collaboration. So this means bringing together big groups of journalists to work together on various topics that, by their nature, have to cross borders. ICIJ itself is a tiny team. We're a little non-profit. We're based in Washington, D.C. We're a part of the American organization, the Center for Public Integrity, which does a similar thing to us but focuses on the US. We have about 11 full-time staff. There's 5 to 6 of us at any given time in DC. The rest of us are spread out around the world. But as you can see, we've got huge ambitions. Hopefully you'll get the idea of that through this presentation. I should also emphasize that we're non-profit because, we're here in San Francisco and everyone's rich here, right? So there are many ways to support ICIJ, and I will doubtless shamelessly plug those ways some stage through this presentation, so keep an eye out. So our investigations always, by their nature, have to cross borders. If it's a single country issue, we leave it to single country investigators. Where we've made a really big name for ourselves in the past couple of years is in in-depth financial investigations into the offshore world. It began with a project called Secrecy for Sale, which I blatantly stole for the title of this talk because everyone better knows that investigation as Offshore leaks, which was its Twitter hashtag. It was the biggest project of its kind at the time. It was a huge data leak, the first time the offshore world ever suffered from a data leak. So you can imagine that there would be a lot of angry dictators trying to hide their money in the Cayman Islands who weren't particularly happy. That project then had an offshoot called China Leaks. You can see we like this whole leaks hashtag. China Leaks, when it published back at the start of 2014, actually resulted in what's been called one of the biggest online censorship drives by the Chinese government in history at the time. They blocked multiple news websites around the world, all of our partners, including The Guardian, Le Monde, us. We remain blocked proudly in China today, not so proudly. So that was another really big story. That brings us to the big hit of the end of 2014, Luxembourg Leaks. Once again, another financial investigation crossing borders, which essentially resulted in massive European investigations that are ongoing. In fact, just today there was a big announcement out of Europe about the car maker Fiat actually getting a fine for, not fine, sorry, they pretty much got a slap on their wrists for some of the stuff that we uncovered in Luxembourg Leaks. I'm giving you our resume because, first of all, it's important in journalism, but also it's going to help you understand a lot better how we came to Graph and understand where our journey began. Today, though, I'm going to talk about our big investigation from the start of this year. We called it Swiss Leaks, and hopefully the sound...
HSBC에서 유출된.
Your bankers were helping people dodge tax.
That's like the 10-second taster of it. essentially, we got a big data leak from inside HSBC Switzerland. So I'm going to take you through the story of that. Bear with me for a few minutes because once again, it's really important to understanding how we came to Graph. It starts with this handsome fella who, believe it or not, is an IT guy. His name's Hervé Falciani. Apart from being, good looking and good with the ladies, apparently, that does have a reputation. He was working for HSBC through the 2000s. HSBC Switzerland, which is the private arm of the global bank. HSBC is the second biggest bank in the world. Their Swiss branch operates within that traditional realm of Swiss secrecy. So we all know the Swiss banking system. We all wish we had a Swiss banking account. People in this room might actually have one for you. I apologize if we uncovered anything. What they wanted to do was reorganize their IT infrastructure. So they brought handsome Hervé across to Switzerland. He's from France, was working in Monaco, and pretty much gave him the keys to the kingdom. Within the Swiss branch, it was very common that data itself was segregated. So if you're an account manager, you might only have access to the financial details, but not actually know whose money you're playing with. And the same goes if you're a client manager, you might only have access to the client details and their names, but not really know too much about their accounts. And they did that to try and maintain some of the secrecy within the system. It's like to the point that not even bank employees would necessarily know whose money they were working with. Hervé comes in to overhaul their IT infrastructure, and he finds that he's got access to everything. So all of a sudden, he can see not just the names of the clients, but also the dollar amounts in their accounts. And also, my favorite part, were the client notes, where bank managers had been reaching out and contacting clients and then writing whingy notes about them, whiny notes about, so-and-so wants to hide his money from his ex-wife because he thinks she cheated. And it was amazing. On seeing this, Hervé decided to take it all. His reasons for this you can go into. I'm probably, hopefully, tweeting a link about Hervé Falciani. So read his story. It's very fascinating. But ultimately, when he stole it, the Swiss found out. They weren't happy. They moved to arrest him. He runs across the border into France in a dramatic midnight escape and essentially turns all the data over to the French authorities in exchange for safe haven. A few years go by, French authorities do little bits here and there with it, and eventually it winds up with these two very French-looking men, not quite as handsome as Hervé, but they are brilliant investigative reporters from the Paris daily Le Monde. What they got their hands on was actually the data that the French investigators had kind of transformed they'd kind of sucked a lot of it out of Hervé's original database. Through their own sources inside the French government, these guys get their hands on it and do what most investigative reporters do when you get this kind of data leak. Keep it to yourself, don't tell anyone, don't tell your editor, write amazing stories, cause one hell of a lot of trouble. They published a few stories in Le Monde about the French names inside this data because obviously that's what their French audience cared about. And then kind of were wondering what to do with the rest. This is where ICIJ comes in. When you look at this data set, it's huge, it's global. It's not just I think it's 1,500 French names or 5,000 French names. The number escapes me off the top of my head. There are lots of names from all around the world. So they thought, this data set is too good to throw away, too good to waste. Let's take it to some international journalists who can collaborate and hopefully start telling a bit more of a global story. And it's kind of a good thing that they did come to us because it would have been an incredible waste if they didn't. There are 100,000 clients in there from pretty much every country in the world, representing about $100 billion. So these, for journalists, these are huge numbers. I don't know about you data guys, but for journalists, we were like, oh my God, that is amazing. We had 25 years of account details, including those magical client notes, though they were only for 1 year. The files themselves, by the end, we had about 60,000 files, mostly Excel spreadsheets, and you'll get to see them in a minute. They're pretty hideous. ICIJ, recognizing the potential for a good global investigation, started pulling together a team, our biggest ever, because we've always got to go one bigger and one better than last time, and started giving reporters access to the information with a view to starting the investigation. So they could start doing what we call an investigative sniff, find out how much crap there really is in the data. At the same time, we had to start asking ourselves some important questions for how we were going to deal with this data. There was a lot of it, but what we do is facilitate these global investigations. We needed to be thinking about our end users. We needed to be thinking, what are these reporters going to be looking for when they go and dive into the data? How can we best use all of it and make it all available in a way that they can fully explore it to the depth that they needed to? And how can we do it all with just one developer? Thankfully, our developer's kind of like this guy from the Lego movie. You give him a sniff of data and he's just like, oh my God, what can we do with it? What can we do with it? Let's build a spaceship. So, with all of that energy, we started taking a much closer look at what we had. This slide I like to call, what the hell were the French thinking? As I said before, it's important to understand we did not have the original database. We had what the French investigators had done with the database. Clearly, they didn't have many data guys, much like us. Can't blame them. So what they did was try and extract the information into a format that most of their investigators were comfortable with, Microsoft Excel. What we had predominantly in these 60,000 files were two main types. There were country lists, which is the one you see at the top, which kind of gave an overview of the clients that the French had broken down into kind of vague country categories on some criteria that they thought were important. Then we also had much more detailed client files. These included addresses, sometimes passport numbers, dates of birth. It included, most importantly, lists of all the accounts that these people were linked with. So you can see from that top list that you're only seeing one account in there. But actually, well, Emilio is a good example because he was a big-time Spanish banker and he had a fair few accounts. He was linked with a number of accounts. Those accounts were linked with a number of people. You guys probably get the idea of where this is going, but I'm going to draw it out painfully because that's what I do. So we set about reverse engineering this database, taking what the French had done and trying to return it into a format that we could actually work with. Once again, we kept those important questions right at the top of our heads. We needed to remember what our end users wanted when they went to access the data. And most reporters, when they get down to it, they want to be able to sort, they want to be able to filter, they want to search, they want to find patterns. Most importantly, they want to know what's happening in their country, in their city, right next door, because we all kind of like world news a little bit. But everyone is most interested in why the cops were at the end of their street that night, or what Mr. Jones across the way is hiding in his Swiss bank account. So we put a lot of work into extracting the geographical data out of this. Scraping out addresses, there was contemplations of looking at phone numbers until we realized it wasn't very good because the country codes weren't consistent. We tried as much as possible to compile more comprehensive country lists and show where a client could be linked to different countries. This is where I start stumbling because I thought C# was just a music note. It turns out apparently you can create robots and scrape data out and put it into SQL relational databases. We then turned those back into, we got it to spit out Excel spreadsheets on the other side because once again, thinking about our end users, what were they most comfortable with? We gave them these lists of clients that we believed were related to their country, and this gave them the opportunity to really start investigating. At the same time, we indexed all of the original 60,000 files, made them fully searchable, and we also gave everyone access to a secure forum so that we could start collaborating and working together. That was never going to be enough because by its very nature, the offshore world is horrendously complex. This is very deliberate. If you bother actually watching over the details of this slide as it slowly trickles its way through, you can see that for each account, there are so many different options that people can activate to have different layers of privacy and secrecy over their accounts. If you're going to have a Swiss bank account, it's very rare that I'm going to open a Swiss bank account in the name of Hamish Boland-Rudder. I'm instead going to hide underneath the corporation. I'm going to tell the bank not to send me any mail because I definitely don't want the Australian or the American governments knowing how much money I have there. I'm going to ask that my account manager doesn't actually know my real name and uses a code name when they call me. There was one person in the files actually who would call up each day with the name of a different famous footballer every day and ask, hello, what's the price of caviar? And that was apparently code for how much money is in my account today. So it's really secretive. Combine that with the fact that it crosses multiple jurisdictions. The company that owns my account isn't based in Switzerland, it's based in Panama, and that's owned by a trust in British Virgin Islands, which is owned by 3 companies. One of them's in, I don't know, Cayman Islands, all these places that I can no longer go for holidays because the governments don't like me very much. Thankfully, we'd had a little bit of experience in this area before. Our offshore leaks investigation that I mentioned right at the beginning was a very similar data set in terms of dealing with cross-jurisdictional, very complex account structures. After we published, we decided that we wanted to make a lot of that data public and searchable in a way that would make sense for average users. So we set about creating the Offshore Leaks database. This came out a few months after we published the original stories in 2013, and you can check it out online. It's still there. It kind of looked like a graph structured thing, but it wasn't. It was actually simulating the structure using SQL, and then we had a JavaScript library jazzing up the front, so it looked like a proper networked graph. What we realized, an important lesson from this, was that we released this after the fact, but then realized that other journalists who hadn't been investigating with us were actually going to it and using it for new investigations. And they were finding new stories and new links that we hadn't really seen before because we hadn't used this as a part of our reporting tools. It was still driving a lot of traffic for the website, and apparently we got a lot of feedback saying that it was much more intuitive than looking at these lots of flat Excel files and different emails laid out. So, ding, 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 we start looking for a solution. We think maybe graph is the way to go for this. When we went looking for a solution, there were a few things that we had to consider along the way. First of all, we had to cater for journalists. I don't know how many of you have met like particularly old school investigative journalists. They're usually the grumpiest people on the planet. They're cantankerous. They hate new things. They hate you. They hate everything. They don't want to learn anything new. They just want to do the story. Shut up and leave me alone. No, I don't want to read your instruction manual. Oh my God, I don't really care about the entire data set. I just want to know if the Prime Minister's in there or the President. I don't care. Just shut up and give me everything. That's who we were dealing with. And we needed to be able to facilitate their investigations because, as in any collaboration, the stronger each individual element is, the stronger the whole is. We knew that if we gave them the tools, that they're going to come out with better stories and it's going to be better for everyone. I mentioned before that we also had a super excitable but still only one developer really working on this data. Rigo is amazing, he's a genius, but there's only one guy, and we needed to do this quickly. We needed an off-the-shelf solution. We needed something that wasn't going to require huge amounts of development work. We found Linkurious, which came with a ready-made user interface. Pretty much, it was almost plug and play as far as we were concerned from a deployment perspective. Just as importantly, it was also lightweight and accessible for the journalists. I wrote up there that they were looking at the trees, not at the forest. I don't know how many of you have heard the expression before, but essentially what our journalists were looking for, they didn't care about how big the forest was or whether the whole bloody thing was burning down. They really just wanted to find that one tree with that one name on it and explore that. They were looking for celebrities, for sexy names, for politicians, for the most egregious cases. So we wanted something that would really help. That was our priority in finding a solution. And Linkurious was really good at doing that. It was intuitive, journalists could use it quickly, and it was significantly better than our old solution of having relational databases and simulating graph structures using JavaScript and all other words that I don't understand fully. This is another slide where you get to laugh at me for saying stupid things because I don't necessarily understand all the processes that were going on here, but it does give you a good idea of how we ended up where we went. So we pulled all of the information out of our 60,000 Excel files. We then started breaking down the relationships between them and understanding them. Rigo tells me that Thailand's big, what is it? I've got the name written down because I don't know it. Open Studio for Big Data made it really easy to transform that information that was scraped out using a robot in C# into an SQL database. Then he could spit it out the other side using Talent into Neo4j, plug it in to Linkurious. Oh my God, voila, we have something that I can actually understand, that I can look at and start investigating with. 275,000 nodes, 400,000 relationships. Once again, I know that you guys are used to dealing with big data, but for journalists used to dealing with individual stories, these were huge numbers. And the fact that we were able to process all of that with just one developer kind of worked really well in our favor. This is my response to it. Yeah, science, we can do this. So did it work? I think yes, but I'm pretty biased. So what I'm going to do is take you through one of the case studies, and it's a very, very simple case study of one case where it works really, really well. HSBC Switzerland had some really questionable clients. He wasn't one of them. You may or may not recognize Bashar al-Assad, notorious leader of brutal Syrian regime. Not known to be the world's nicest guy. You don't really want him as your next door neighbor. More commonly associated with images like that, war zones, bombed out villages, etc., death of civilians, not looking good. He had a big family and liked to keep it in the family, as often happens in these dictatorial regimes. I've circled him up there. Pretty sure he's got a fancy rock in the moustache. I think that picture's probably from the 90s sometime. Down in the front row in front of him is his mum, which finally gets us closer to the HSBC clients. Uncle Muhammad and his brood. So this is Bashar al-Assad's uncle. We found them in the HSBC data. His son, Rami Makhlouf, has earned quite a name for himself in the world. He's been referred to as Bashar al-Assad's money man. I've spoken with Syrian journalists who claim that he is almost as powerful within Syria as Bashar himself. He's known for keeping some fairly brutal tactics. So finding Rami in the data, which was a pretty obvious name to search for us, was a good find, right? We've got HSBC Switzerland doing business with a guy who global bodies have put sanctions on and said, yeah, no, you shouldn't go near him. Good story. Let's go searching for him through Linkurious and have a look at how many accounts he has and all the different levels. And let's start expanding some of them. Oh, look, there's Daddy. And sure enough, I'm sure we can find a few other family members in there. It's not supposed to be that messy. When I did create this, it was disappearing in the background. But needless to say, through all of that mess, if it was nice and pretty, you would get eventually to a company where most of the family members had some sort of stake in it, including Rami. And then there was this mysterious Freddie Zinger guy tacked onto the end. And so obviously that raises questions for any investigative reporter. Who, why, what? Turns out he's an Israeli businessman, which is a really strange thing when you think that Syria and Israel have never actually officially had diplomatic ties. They don't do any trade with each other. We're not saying that Freddie necessarily did anything wrong, but the very fact that Bashar al-Assad's first cousin and known to be close associate is linked to an account that has further links to Israeli businessmen, turned what was just a story about one person in one country into a much more complex and interesting story, and led to headlines like this that really beef up the overall data credentials of this sort of investigation. So when you play that out across all the different stories that we were doing, we came up with some real doozies. We found arms traders who were selling weapons to war zones in Africa where there were child soldiers picking up really big guns. We found lots of links to the notorious diamond trade. Diamonds coming out, once again, usually of those war zones in Africa and ending up on the ring fingers of wealthy Europeans. And we also found some really bizarre patterns, like the number of women in the data who were identified as housewives, but were anything but. These were the sort of women that had sometimes been the heads of big companies, or who was a housewife who took a monthly trip to Zurich to withdraw huge bundles of cash so that her government didn't find out. Not your ordinary housewives. So you put all these together, and we've got like a really, really interesting story. And it worked pretty well for us, I'd say. In addition to all of that, we also had lots of stories about the deliberate aiding of tax avoidance by HSBC and their staff. We had politicians and political scandal. We had a lot of sanctions busting going on. There was a lot of questionable habits going on that were revealed by studying this data set and the links between the points of data. So, earlier this year, we all published together, and that model works really well for us, the collaborative model. We do everything together, we investigate together, we share our findings, and then we all publish together, because when one newspaper in one country has one story, it's kind of, that's all right news. But when all of a sudden you have 40 newspapers in 40 countries publishing the exact same stories on their front page, it's huge. You can't ignore it. So, following that model, we published together. We were trending worldwide. We topped the news in multiple countries. It was really cool for all of us. But more importantly, we were looking for some sort of impact. Because you don't do this investigation, this sort of investigation, without thinking, what are we going to achieve from it? What comes out the other end? That is like my favorite picture from some of the impact, because those two like grey-faced, nervous-looking executives there are the heads of HSBC. And the reason they're not looking particularly pleased is because they're sitting in a British parliamentary committee hearing, getting grilled about why weren't you stopping this? Why was this allowed at your bank? And issuing sickly apologies in all the different Sunday papers. Over in the US, there were talks of opening up new investigations into HSBC and their money laundering down through Mexico. Loretta Lynch, the new Attorney General, copped a bit of slack about it because she led the original investigation into HSBC in 2012. We had laws changed and new rules in different countries. We had HSBC offices raided in Geneva, which is huge. For the Swiss authorities to come down on one of the in-house banks, it was unprecedented. This sort of thing had never been done before. HSBC was ordered to pay a fine, admittedly piddly compared to other fines that they've faced, but it was historic. This was really cool stuff for us. We were having our work quoted in parliamentary hearings. We were seeing banks raided as a direct result of the public outrage that our stories kicked up. And researching all of this with Graph made it so much easier. This presentation's not over yet, though, because we've got to get to infinity and beyond. So what's next? Insert cheesy pop lyrics here. I want to see if I can convert you guys all into believers in investigative journalism and how collaborations between investigative journalism and things like graph database providers and services like Linkurious can actually make a really big difference in the world. We learned a lot of lessons from our Swiss Leaks investigation. The first one was data first. We learned that the earlier we did our data work, the better our investigation would be. The earlier we could provide these tools to journalists, the better they'd become familiarized with them and be able to use them more successfully. In fact, we're currently starting our next big investigation. Can't say too much about it except to say that one of the first requests from the bosses was that we set up another instance of Linkurious using Neo4j. This is because our bosses have come to learn, and the journalists we work with have come to learn, that technology is our friend. It's not the enemy. It is not making your job harder. It's making it easier. And it doesn't need to be scary. It's not just something that the cool kids do, sitting away at LAN parties at their house. It's fun. We started teaching a lot of our users. We found that online training sessions were working really well. When we showed them how to use Linkurious and the technology that we'd put together, they loved it. They thought it was really cool. The other really good thing about running those training sessions was we got feedback. We learnt about how they were using this technology, how they were running their searches. We know that no one's really using the Cypher search language despite its simplicity, and we want to change that. We learnt how they were expanding relationships and the new features that they were looking for. And that became a whole new lesson in itself. We want to listen to our users. We want to hear their needs. And we want to be able to keep up with what they want from the services that we're providing. So we're always on the lookout for new tools and new technology. Linkurious came out with a great new version. I feel like I'm doing a plug for them. They've been very excited about it because it allows for things like finding the shortest path between two nodes, which is a great tool when you're doing a financial investigation. It also allows for better sharing of visualizations, which is really great for collaborative investigative journalism, because rather than trying to have to explain the searches that you did to get the result that you got, you can just literally share the visualization. So our reporters are loving it. But we want to keep going. We want to keep trying to figure out what is going to come next for ICIJ and how we can facilitate better global investigations. We've got a lot of data. We've been leaked a few different data sets now. As I said, there was offshore leaks, there was Luxembourg leaks, there was Swiss leaks. There could be a million more that I'll never ever tell you about. We want to start looking at how can we get those data sets talking to each other? How can Graph help us understand the relationships between those different data sets? And what stories is that going to help us tell? Is it going to help us tell some of the old stories that we might have missed or fill in the holes that we didn't really know about before? Pretty confident it's also going to lead to some new investigations. If you start comparing the offshore leaks data set to the Swiss leaks data set, there's some really interesting crossover. We're also wanting to take the time to start looking at the forest. So as I said earlier, up until now, investigative journalists have mostly been focused on individual trees. We want to find the sexy name, the headline story, top of the 6 o'clock news, whatever it is that floats your boat. But at ICIJ, we're all about telling global stories, which is a really difficult thing to do when you think about it, because how many people here want to hear about a global story versus their local story? One of the biggest challenges that we face is trying to get our data to speak in a global way. And we want to start analyzing entire data sets to look for more global patterns. We think that that can result in reporting with much more impact. We want to start exploring the full potential of Graph, seeing what else we can do with it. Some of the things that we've been talking about, the top picture there is I think I stole that straight from Linkurious. It's communications networking, looking at email correspondence and what can you tell by drawing out the relationships between the senders, like between email conversations essentially. Imagine how interesting that would be when we start using it to look at our Swiss leaks data that includes the client notes and emails going between, notes of emails going between clients, or even the offshore leaks database, which includes a lot of emails. The other great thing, which one of my colleagues came back from a recent Neo4j event in Madrid very excited about, was the idea of recommendation engines. Because, you know, if eHarmony can help me find sexy singles in my area who have the same interest as me, and Walmart can, you know, help me find more cool costumes for my dog for Halloween, why can't we put the same technology to use and say to a reporter, hey, we see you've been looking at company A and company B, and you live here, so what about company C? Imagine if we put that technology to use for investigative journalism and start flipping the whole system on its head, whereby the computer can help us, actively help us, with suggestions for our next investigation. Could be really cool. Haven't done it yet. We'll let you know how it goes. So this is your opportunity to get involved, because we're all about teamwork at ICIJ. We're all about collaboration. As I said, we're a tiny, tiny unit. We have huge ambitions. And so most of the way that we fill those ambitions is by working with others and leveraging off each other's resources. We've had some really successful collaborations within journalism, but we've also now had some really successful collaborations beyond journalism. We've started working with companies like Linkurious and Neo4j to optimize what we're doing and to find out what's coming next and find out how we can repurpose some of this technology for journalistic purposes. Nuix has been a great example. They're an Australian company who have helped us with better indexing of some of our leaked files. We've started working with universities who are doing amazing things in the world of data and investigations. Publishing services like CartoDB who help provide easier mapping and some database help as well. And this is a great opportunity for me to ask, you know, what ideas do you guys have that could be repurposed for investigative journalism? As you saw before, we're all about reporting with impact. I am a true believer that, you know, through investigative journalism, we can actually make the world a better place. We can increase accountability. By increasing public awareness of issues, we can hold the powerful to account much more successfully, kind of like this. Like, by working together, we can have much bigger results. Maybe not save the world from the alien invasion, but hopefully save the world from some issues of corruption. So, if you guys have a good idea, if you have a product that you think could be repurposed into journalism. If you have any idea, if you just want to get in touch and say, hey, if you want to throw some money our way, please reach out to us. We speak with everyone. We're used to hearing from everyone, and we'd love to hear from you. By sharing ideas, we can definitely improve products that we create, and hopefully generate some new clients for you guys as well. Thank you very much for putting up with me, the non-tech geek of the conference, and thank you to Neo4j for having me here as well. I'm happy to take questions. I may give really stupid answers, or you can come and find me afterwards. I'm Australian, I'm always up for a beer, so thank you. I'll go there first.
This is very impressive. Which country would you recommend now to where we could invest quietly?
It's a very good question, actually. My bosses and I always say we're in the wrong business. So we're sitting here spending late nights poring over the account details of multi-billionaires thinking, why? Why isn't it us? We know how to hide the money now. I can tell you the places I'm not allowed to go for holidays anymore. I'm struggling with telling you where to invest. Seychelles seems to be one of the next big things in the offshore industry. So give it a go, but we'll be on to you.
So did you ever hire more than one developer?
Being in the non-profit world, finances are always a big concern for us. We have to be really conservative. And that's why our collaborative model works really well. Because when you look at it from a journalism perspective, we don't pay the 190 reporters that we work with. Instead, their news organizations continue paying for them. And there's a bit of a barter system. We come to them with a story and say, hey, we've got a great story. We don't necessarily have the resources to investigate it ourselves in your country. What can you bring to the table? In return, you get access to this amazing world issue. And in a way, we're hoping that we can foster more collaborations with people outside journalism in much the same way. Obviously, the payoff is slightly different. Nuix is a good example of one of those collaborations, as is Linkurious. They were mostly interested in broadening their own perspectives and broadening their own experience as a company. And what we can do, because we have such a big network, is essentially offer exposure to people who might not otherwise see your product and your work and the potential ways it's applicable to their daily work. So all of our partners now love Nuix. They love Linkurious. And if it wasn't for a collaboration between us, I'm not saying that wouldn't have happened, but it might have taken a little bit longer. So if we're actually looking for a developer at the moment. Yeah, pretty much. Actually, that's the lower link down there. It's kind of like, oh, free advertising for me. I can get that job ad out there a little bit more. So yeah, please feel free. And as I said before, if anyone has an idea that could be applicable to what we're doing, bring it to us. We'd love to hear it. At absolute worst, we'll knock you back. But who's not used to having that done once or twice? We'll usually point you in the direction of one of our partners who might be able to put the idea to better use.
Hi. So matching up people is hard. That's why we have loyalty programs, right?
Yeah.
So what about false positives or false correlations or any of those things? How are those dealt with?
So at the moment, we fall back very heavily on our old journalism practices. It's one of the things that differentiates us from an organization like WikiLeaks, who often do work with journalists but aren't necessarily journalistic in themselves. Everything we do is fact-checked over and over, and at the moment, most of that's happening manually. One of the great things that Linkurious enabled for this last investigation, we're hoping for the next one, is much better and more efficient fact-checking. But at the moment, we're still doing that with individuals going through and cross-referencing other data sets, other things about these people. As you can imagine, when you have 400 Mohammed Makloufs with 400 different birth dates, it's really important that we get it right and that we're naming the right person. We haven't put technology to work to do that as yet, although it is making those manual processes slightly easier. I think it's going to be an interesting journey for us as we explore the potential for using technology to take over some of that work. And whether it can still meet the really high levels of quality that we need it to do in order to publish these very controversial stories. I hope that kind of answers the question, not too roundabout a way.
Last question.
Thank you. I was just wondering if there were any attacks on the website trying to bring it down, whether you had to deal with that sort of thing.
Touch wood, not that I'm aware of. Thus far, we've had a lot of success. We've slowly upped our security measures along the way to be vigilant about these things. Thankfully, a lot of the data sets that we've been dealing with, governments haven't been interested in stealing them because often they already have them and are just sitting on it and doing nothing with it. So they kind of like us doing our work because it saves them a bit of work. And they have tended to be more the bigger concern for us, and thankfully thus far, no. But we're always vigilant and we're always keeping an eye on the security world as well. I did hear someone say last question, but I'm not sure if, is that it? That's it. We're done. I'm released, but please come find me after. I will be on the hunt for a beer. Thank you very, very much again for having me, and I will see you all around.